We get to watch real NFL football. Well, kind of real. It's exhibition. It's preseason football, but this is not a drill. It's the Locked On NFL podcast. And look, we're quarterback heavy today. Everything you need to know about the Carson Wentz injury. Also, why the Vikings are down to QB3. And are the Pats really running it back with Cam Newton? Are they? And what type of first impression is Sam Darnold making on his new Panthers teammates? It's all coming up on this edition of the Locked On NFL podcast.
It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the show. It is the Locked On NFL podcast. I'm your Monday host, Brack, daily host of Locked On Cardinals. Please check out what we're doing over at Locked On Cardinals. Subscribe to our podcast. Check out our YouTube channel. And, of course, the Locked On NFL podcast is live on YouTube. Great daily content, including this video. We're going to get into the Carson Wentz injury. We also have other videos up featuring Mike Debate of Locked On Patriots. Getting into this conversation, this is quarterback battle that's brewing in Foxborough between Cam Newton and rookie Mac Jones. We're going to discuss that later on today's podcast. And Julian Council, our Locked On Panthers host, he's going to join us and tell us what type of first impression Sam Darnold is making on his Carolina Panthers teammates. And what's more important to that offense is success. Is it Christian McCaffrey staying healthy or Darnold establishing himself as a starting caliber NFL signal caller? This Monday episode is brought to you by Peacock and Williamson. Of course, Brian Peacock, NFL analyst, former NFL scout Matt Williamson. They're at Locked On's Peacock and Williamson, which can be heard Monday through Friday, giving you a national perspective all around the league with all the latest news, insight on every game, team, and more from around the league. Get your picks, your previews every weekday on Peacock and Williamson's podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, subscribe to them wherever you find podcasts. A few news and notes to get into before we get into that Carson Wentz injury. It was the Baltimore Ravens. They were seeking out pass rush help, and they think that they found it. They have signed veteran pass rusher Justin Houston. You can see it was official. The team announced on social media. Justin Houston just third of the active leaders in sacks in the NFL. He's only behind some pretty rarefied air, some elite pass rushers, and J.J. Watt and Von Miller. Actually, Von Miller leads active pass rushers in sacks. Houston with 97.5. He joins a pretty talented Baltimore Ravens defense. And staying in that division, it was Nick Chubb doing what a lot of running backs aren't always able to do, and that's securing the bag. Here's according to Ian Rappaport. Now it's multiple reports that say the Browns and Nick Chubb, they've agreed in principle on a 3-year contract extension worth $36.6 million with $20 million guaranteed. Huge deal for the bell cow there in Cleveland. Chubb, since entering the league out of Georgia in 2019, he's only third behind, of course, King Henry, Derrick Henry, and Dalvin Cook of the Minnesota Vikings in rushing yards. Derrick Henry with 3,500, Cook with 2,700. Chubb has 2,500, but he's got a few less carries, significantly less carries than King Henry. But he secures the bag. And also the news from over the weekend. This is via Tom Pelissaro of NFL Network that the Vikings are expected to be without 3 quarterbacks, including starter Kirk Cousins, for tonight's practice. This was on Saturday after rookie Kellen Mond tested positive for COVID-19. Per league sources, Cousins is a high-risk close contact. The team is going through contact tracing. That certainly puts the Vikings quarterback room in flux. One we didn't anticipate. One also we didn't anticipate was what went down on Friday. The Indianapolis Colts, their quarterback room was kind of sent into a frenzy after their big offseason acquisition, Carson Wentz. He suffered a foot injury, and we're going to bring on our guy from Locked On Colts, Evan Sidery. He joins us here on the Locked On NFL podcast. And Evan, the Carson Wentz comeback season took a big hit. The Colts are at least getting one of their former quarterbacks, their head coach, Frank Reich, back today on Monday.
Yeah, that's the big boost right there, getting Reich back in there. But I mean, you just let it off there, Bo. And Carson Wentz, this is such a critical time for Carson Wentz to get in a rhythm and chemistry with his new teammates, especially with how the Colts were one of the lightest teams in OTAs. They only had about a 10-day period, I believe, without any contact. So now you head into training camp 2 days in. Carson Wentz hurt his foot. OC Marcus Brady was filling in for Frank Reich, said he felt a little quote-unquote twinge in his foot, and that's why he sat out. And obviously you hear all the reports from Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, et cetera, about how it could be a lot more than what we originally thought. So it's a big derailment for this Colts team. He's going to miss all of training camp, all preseason per reports. And if he elects for surgery, Bo, this is a situation where the Colts could be out with their quarterback for the first month or more of the season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The report's not good on Carson Wentz. They brought in Brett Hundley, the former Packers, Seahawks, Arizona Cardinals, most recently backup quarterback. He'll battle it out with second-year signal caller Jacob Eason for the rights to potentially start the season as the Colts starting quarterback. We'll get into maybe some trade scenarios, some names that could be attached to Indianapolis soon, but just the quarterback room as it sits, what's the best case scenario for the Colts week one?
I would honestly, I'm at the point where Brett Hundley's a really good backup. I think he's actually an okay backup who can win you some games. You saw it in Arizona, but I mean, he won them a game or two before. But I honestly would just roll with Jacob Eason, 4th-round pick. He has high upside, strong arm. He can hit it 60-plus yards down the field. The intangibles with Eason were kind of the question marks out at University of Washington. The physical traits are off the charts, though. I would just roll with the punches and see what Eason has in that first 5 weeks of the season. But that stretch they have to open the season: Seahawks, Rams, Titans, Dolphins, Ravens. That is a murderer's row to start a season for any NFL team. I have to imagine it's probably the toughest schedule of any team in the first 5 weeks. And if Eason's going in that's a baptism by fire situation for him for sure. And they'll find out pretty quickly if he's a legit quarterback in the NFL. And if not, they can go to Brett Hundley maybe midway through that stretch, or Sam Ehlinger, who they drafted in the 6th round this past year. But it's not a spot the Colts ever expected to be in. I know Carson Wentz had injury history in the past, but they had no experience behind them. Eason didn't take a snap in a single game last year, didn't dress in a single game last year. So the Colts are in a really tough spot here. I would roll with Eason just to see what he has for the future, but I would not be shocked at all if it doesn't work out the first couple weeks. You go with Brett Hundley.
Couple names people are banning about: Marcus Mariota, Nick Foles, the easy connecting of the dots there. Gardner Minshew staying in the AFC South, Jimmy Garoppolo. Any realistic scenario where they bring in a veteran quarterback to take over the starting reins?
Yeah, that's the big question, and one, honestly, I would never have thought would happen about a week or two ago just because of this injury. But the situation with Carson Wentz, and this is what happened in Philadelphia, I do wonder if this is in the back of Chris Ballard's mind, their GM, is that when they drafted Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia, it kind of shut down. Carson Wentz did. I mean, Wentz could be back midseason. If they go out and trade for a Foles especially, or a Mariota, and he does well during that stretch, and if Carson Wentz doesn't see the field again, that shuts down his confidence again, and the Colts just wasted a 2nd-round pick on a guy that's never going to play a game for them. So I do wonder if they just maybe try to survive the stretch, maybe go out and get a street free agent, another one if Hundley doesn't work out. But I mean, maybe you can go out and get like a Gardner Minshew for a 6th-round pick. He's probably the one I like most off that list. Mariota probably was too much of a price. Foles probably would only be a 6th, 7th-round pick. We know the history between Foles and Wentz there, so I don't know if that will work out. But yeah, the Colts are in such a tough spot, Bo. I mean, the Colts, I don't really know like how they're going to get through the stretch without Carson Wentz, because they put all their chips in on this working with Carson Wentz this year. And if it doesn't work out, the season's going to go kaput just like that. And it might already be doing that, honestly. And that's crazy to say.
Yeah, it's a beefed up division, the AFC South. It isn't as soft as it was the last couple seasons. The Titans are, team that really wants to put themselves in the thick of contention, and of course the Jacksonville Jaguars are much improved. You've got the dumpster fire, the Houston Texans, but the Colts, there was huge expectations. Let me ask you this: I mean, you mentioned it. It's all a 2nd-round pick. You kind of just said it in passing. There are huge implications as far as Carson Wentz, whether or not he gets back, in the draft pick compensation. Maybe remind our listeners, our viewers, of what that could be, the scenarios that it could be for Philadelphia.
Yeah, these implications for both sides now are huge depending on what happens to Carson Wentz in this injury. I believe the implications are, off the top of my head, either 75% of the snaps overall that Wentz plays, it conveys to a 1st-round pick. If it's 70% and they make the playoffs for the Colts, it still conveys to a 1st-round pick. If he falls below those thresholds for either one, that conveys to a second-round pick for the Colts. And I did the math. Just if you divide up 17 games of regular season, let's say he missed the first 5 games, you're already at 71% of the snaps that he would be at. So missing 29% of those snaps already. So it would not be surprising at all if he was to land, let's say, on the PUP list and miss the first 6 weeks of the season. That's already a second-round pick officially for Philadelphia instead of a first-round pick. So the Eagles expected 3 first-round picks next year, Bo, and already that could already be in flux for them.
It's one of the bigger stories in the NFL early on here in training camp. Make sure you're locked in the Locked On Colts with Evan Sidery. Make sure you're following along on Twitter at @eSidery. You can see it there as you watch on YouTube. Evan, as always, man, thanks.
Appreciate it, Bo.